Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi, Herman and Corin. So the summer will eventually come round, and with it, some more time spent outdoors. And after the summer, well, there will be the autumn and the winter. But we have a couple more months of light rain. As you know, the climate in Israel, especially compared to where I grew up, is very, very seasonal. The rain kind of stops and starts around a pretty specific time of year. But during those times, one also might wish to be engaging in some outdoor pursuits. And I thought this would be a good episode to talk about waterproofing electronics or waterproofing standards. So a couple of directions I'd love to know a bit more about, Herman and Corin. We did an episode about indoor speakers, and I mentioned I was looking for a speaker for listening to these podcasts, something with a very wide throw. And outdoor speakers are also a popular thing to have, but you need to look for waterproofing. There's IP68 and IP65 in a couple of these standards, and they usually say things that sound like way more than you'd ever need. Like, this has been proven to be immersible up to 3 meters of water and survive this much pressure. That's great, but not really relevant for the majority of home users who, when they're buying a Bluetooth speaker or any kind of speaker, just want to know, is this thing going to stand up to some rain? So what is the kind of practical spec you're looking for there? And then for getting electricity outdoors, water and electricity are not the best of friends, or it's a very bad recipe for getting electrocuted while you're throwing a nice outdoor party in the rain. So for protected plugs and anything that might be powering those speakers, what are the waterproofing standards that are relevant there? If we're talking about a speaker that draws 230 volts or 110 for those in the US, in other words, normal AC input, what is it? What kind of standards and what are you looking for to make sure that you're buying something that's really quality and safe to power those lovely outdoor speakers? Herman and Corin, let's talk about outdoor weatherproof and waterproof electronics in today's episode of My Word Prompts.
Hey there, welcome to the show. You know, I was looking out at the patio the other day, and it occurred to me that our outdoor setup has grown quite a bit over the last few years. We have the lights, the speakers, even a little charging station for when we are working outside. But every time a storm rolls in, I find myself second-guessing whether I actually bought the right gear for the environment. It is one thing to have a little Bluetooth speaker you can grab and run inside with, but when you start mounting things to the side of the house or burying cables in the yard, the stakes get a lot higher.
Herman Poppleberry here. And Corn, that is a classic case of what I like to call spec sheet anxiety. We see these numbers and letters on the box, and we assume higher is always better, but we do not always understand what they are actually protecting against. Today's prompt from Daniel is about exactly that. Specifically, waterproofing electronics and the standards we should be looking for when we are setting up things like outdoor speakers or power systems. It is February of 26, and even though we have seen massive leaps in material science over the last decade, the fundamental physics of water and electricity remain as antagonistic as ever.
It is a great topic because the marketing can be so misleading. You see a picture of a speaker at the bottom of a swimming pool, but in reality most people just need it to survive a heavy downpour or a stray spray from a garden hose. Daniel mentioned the IP68 and IP65 standards, and I think that is the perfect place for us to start. Herman, for the uninitiated, can you break down what those two digits actually represent? Because it is not just a random scale from 1 to 100.
Exactly. IP stands for Ingress Protection. It is an international standard defined by the International Electrotechnical Commission, specifically Standard 60529. The code is almost always 2 digits. The first digit refers to protection against solid objects, like dust, sand, or even fingers. That scale goes from 0 to 6. A 0 means no protection, while a 1 would protect against something large like a hand. By the time you get to a 4, you are protected against wires and small screws. A 5 means it is dust protected, meaning some dust might get in, but not enough to interfere with the operation. A 6, however, means it is dust tight, so no particulates are getting inside the housing at all.
Right. And for outdoor gear, you almost always want that to be a 5 or a 6, because wind-blown dust and grit can be just as destructive as water over time. It can gum up buttons or act as an abrasive on seals. If you live in a place like Arizona, or even here in Jerusalem where the dust can get quite fine, that first digit is actually more important than people realize.
Spot on. But the second digit is the one everyone focuses on, and that is the liquid protection. That scale goes from 0 all the way up to 9. When Daniel mentions IP65 versus IP68, he is highlighting a really important distinction in how water actually interacts with the device. IP65 means the device is protected against water jets. Specifically, it is tested by spraying water through a 6.3 millimeter nozzle from any direction for at least 3 minutes at a rate of 12.5 liters per minute.
So that is basically a heavy rainstorm, or someone accidentally hitting the speaker with a hose while watering the plants. It is about volume and direction, but not necessarily about the pressure you get from being deep underwater.
Exactly. It is about velocity and volume, but not pressure from depth. Now, when you jump up to IP67 or IP68, you are moving into the realm of immersion. IP67 means it can be submerged in up to 1 meter of water for 30 minutes. IP68 is even more rigorous, usually meaning it can go deeper than 1 meter with the specific depth and duration defined by the manufacturer. Usually, that is around 3 meters, but it can be more.
This is where I think the marketing gets a little bit silly. Daniel pointed out that a lot of these speakers claim to be submersible up to 3 meters, but if I am putting a speaker on my deck, I am never going to submerge it. Does having that IP68 rating actually offer better protection against rain than an IP65 rating? Or is it just a different kind of protection?
That is such a perceptive question, Corn, and the answer might surprise some people. In many cases, a device that is rated for immersion, like IP67, might not actually be rated for high-pressure water jets, which would be IP66. Think about it this way. A seal that can withstand the slow, steady pressure of being underwater might fail if a high-velocity stream of water hits it at a specific angle. The immersion test is about the integrity of the seals under static pressure. The jet test is about the mechanical strength of the housing and the seals against kinetic energy.
That is fascinating. So you could have a phone that you could drop in a pool, but if you held it directly in front of a high-pressure power washer, the water might actually force its way past the gaskets. I have seen people make that mistake when cleaning their outdoor gear. They think because it is waterproof, they can blast it with a pressure washer, and then they wonder why the screen starts flickering the next day.
Precisely. For the average home user, IP65 is often the sweet spot for something like an outdoor speaker. It tells you that the enclosure is designed to shed water that is falling or being sprayed at it. If you have a speaker that is IP65, you can leave it out in a thunderstorm and feel pretty confident. The leap to IP68 is really for peace of mind if you live in a flood-prone area, or if you are mounting the speaker right next to a pool where it might actually get knocked into the water. But there is another rating people should look for if they are really serious, IP69K.
69K? That sounds like something you would find on a submarine or a piece of industrial food processing equipment.
That is exactly where it started. The K stands for a German standard that was later adopted into the international system. It means the device can withstand high pressure, high temperature washdowns. We are talking about water at 80 degrees Celsius being blasted at the device at a pressure of up to 100 bar. You see this on some high-end outdoor security cameras and ruggedized sensors now. It is overkill for a speaker, but it shows you just how far these standards can go.
I also want to talk about the physical reality of these seals. We see these ratings on a brand new product, but these speakers are sitting outside in the sun. In Jerusalem, we get some pretty intense ultraviolet radiation and significant temperature swings between day and night. How do those IP ratings hold up after 2 years of sitting in the sun?
That is the dirty little secret of the industry. IP ratings are a snapshot in time. They are tested in a lab with fresh water at a stable temperature. In the real world, you have thermal expansion and contraction. During the day, the air inside the speaker heats up and expands. At night, it cools down and creates a slight vacuum. This can actually pull moisture through the seals over time. Plus, UV rays degrade the rubber and silicone gaskets. After a few seasons, an IP65 speaker might effectively become an IP54 speaker.
So the practical takeaway there is that even if it is rated for the outdoors, giving it a bit of shelter, like putting it under an eave or a small awning, is going to massively extend its lifespan. It is not just about the rain, it is about protecting the materials that provide the waterproofing in the first place. I always tell people, the best waterproofing is a roof.
Absolutely. And that leads us into the second part of Daniel's prompt, which is much more serious from a safety perspective. We have been talking about battery-powered Bluetooth speakers, but what happens when you want a more permanent setup? Daniel asked about the standards for protected plugs and electronics that draw 110 or 230 volts of alternating current power. This is where the stakes go from a broken speaker to a potential fire or electrocution hazard.
Yeah, the physics here are unforgiving. Water is a conductor, especially rainwater which picks up particulates as it falls, or pool water which is full of chemicals. When you have high voltage sitting outdoors, you need more than just a rubber gasket. You need a system that can fail safely. If you are running 230 volts to a powered subwoofer on your patio, you are essentially bringing the danger of the kitchen or the bathroom into an environment that is constantly changing.
Right. When we talk about outdoor power, the first thing anyone should look for is a ground fault circuit interrupter, or GFCI. In some regions, like the United Kingdom or Australia, these are called residual current devices, or RCDs. These are not technically a waterproofing standard, but they are the most important safety component for outdoor electronics.
For those who are not electrical engineers, can you explain the millisecond level magic that a GFCI is performing? Because it really is a life-saving piece of technology that we often take for granted.
It is actually a very elegant piece of engineering. A GFCI constantly monitors the amount of current flowing from the hot wire to the neutral wire. In a perfect circuit, those two numbers should be identical. If there is even a tiny discrepancy, as small as 4 to 6 milliamperes, the GFCI assumes that the missing electricity is leaking somewhere it should not be, like through a person or into a puddle of water. It then snaps the circuit shut in about 1/30th of a second.
It is basically a lightning-fast bodyguard for your heart. But even with a GFCI, we still need to keep the water out of the physical plug. Daniel mentioned the standards for the plugs themselves. If I'm looking at an outdoor outlet, I usually see those heavy plastic covers. Is there a specific rating for those?
Yes, there is. In the United States, we often look for what is called an in-use cover or a while in-use cover. The National Electrical Code requires these for outdoor outlets. They are designed so that even when a cord is plugged in, the cover can close completely and create a weatherproof seal. These are often rated as NEMA 3R or NEMA 4X.
NEMA is the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, right? How does that compare to the IP ratings we were talking about earlier?
They overlap quite a bit, but NEMA ratings are often more comprehensive for industrial and outdoor enclosures. For example, a NEMA 4X rating means the enclosure is protected against wind-blown dust and rain, but it also has to be resistant to corrosion. That is a huge factor for outdoor electronics that people often overlook. If you live near the coast, the salt in the air will eat through a standard electronic housing in a matter of months if it is not specifically treated.
That is a great point, and it brings us back to the speakers. If you are buying a high-end outdoor speaker that plugs into the wall, you really need to look at how that power cable is handled. Some speakers use a proprietary waterproof connector, while others just have a standard lead that you are supposed to plug into a weatherproof box. I have seen some setups where the speaker itself is rated IP67, but the power brick is just a standard indoor transformer that someone has tucked under a chair. That is a recipe for disaster.
And this is where I see a lot of DIY mistakes. People will buy a great IP-rated speaker, but then they use a standard indoor extension cord to reach the outlet. Or they leave the connection point between two cords sitting on the ground where water can pool. If you are running power to outdoor speakers, you should ideally be using burial-rated cable or conduit, and all your connections should happen inside an enclosure rated for the environment.
I have seen some of those enclosures that claim to be waterproof, but they just look like a plastic box with a snap-on lid. Are those actually reliable? I see them in hardware stores for $10, and they claim to protect your Christmas lights or your speaker connections.
Some of them are, but you have to look for the gasket. A truly waterproof electrical box will have a compressible seal, usually made of EPDM or silicone, that runs the entire perimeter of the lid. It should also have some kind of cord grip or strain relief where the wires enter the box. If the wire just slides through a hole, water will find its way in through capillary action. Water is surprisingly good at climbing up wires.
Capillary action is such a sneaky enemy. I remember reading about a car where the engine computer was ruined because oil wicked its way up through the inside of a wire from a leaking sensor. Water can do the exact same thing. If your outdoor speaker has a cord hanging down, and that cord goes into a box, the water will run down the cord and right into the box, unless you have what is called a drip loop.
I am so glad you brought up the drip loop, Corn. That is the most low-tech, high-impact waterproofing trick in existence. You just make sure the wire dips down below the level of the entry point before going back up into the device or the outlet box. Gravity pulls the water to the bottom of the loop, where it drips off, instead of following the wire into the sensitive electronics. It costs $0 and takes 5 seconds to implement, but it saves thousands of dollars in equipment.
It is so simple, yet I see it missed all the time. Let's talk about the speakers themselves for a second. Daniel mentioned 230 volts or 110 volts. Most modern outdoor speakers, at least the high-quality ones, actually use a separate power brick or transformer that drops the voltage down to something much safer, like 12 or 24 volts DC, before the wire ever goes outside.
That is definitely the gold standard for safety. If you can keep the high voltage AC inside the house and only run low voltage DC to the speakers, you have removed 90% of the danger. Even if a squirrel chews through a 12-volt wire in a rainstorm, you are looking at a blown fuse or a dead speaker, not a life-threatening situation. This is why many professional landscape lighting systems and outdoor audio systems use what we call Class 2 power supplies.
But some people want those massive, high-powered active speakers for a big backyard party, and those often require a full mains connection. If someone is determined to go that route, what should they be looking for on the spec sheet to ensure it is high quality?
First, look for a laboratory certification like UL, which stands for Underwriters Laboratories, or ETL. Specifically, you want to see that it is listed for wet locations. This is a higher standard than just being damp rated. A damp-rated device can handle humidity and the occasional condensation, like in a bathroom. A wet location rating means the device can be in direct contact with rain or snow.
And what about the internal construction? I imagine the cooling is a major challenge. If you seal a high-powered amplifier inside a waterproof box to keep the rain out, how do you get the heat out? Especially in the summer when the ambient temperature is already 35 degrees Celsius.
That is the engineering trade-off. Most waterproof electronics use the entire outer shell as a heat sink. You will see these heavy aluminum fins on the back of high-quality outdoor speakers. They are using passive cooling because they cannot have a fan. A fan requires an air intake, and an air intake is a giant hole for water to enter. If you see an outdoor speaker with a fan, stay away from it unless it is part of a very sophisticated, very expensive industrial cooling system with specialized baffles.
It makes sense why those outdoor rated amps are so much more expensive than their indoor counterparts. You're paying for the thermal management and the specialized gaskets. I also think we should touch on the connectors. Daniel asked about what to look for to make sure you are buying something safe.
Look for gold-plated or nickel-plated connectors. Corrosion is the silent killer of outdoor electronics. Even if water doesn't get inside the housing, it will sit on the exposed metal of the plugs. This creates oxidation, which increases resistance, which leads to heat, which can eventually melt the plastic or cause a short. In 2026, we are seeing more use of specialized polymers and connectors that are resistant to salt spray and chemical exposure.
And for the speaker wire itself, if you are not using a pre-made cable, you want to look for wire that is rated for direct burial or at least UV resistant. Standard speaker wire has a clear PVC jacket that will turn brittle and crack after 6 months in the sun. Once that jacket cracks, water gets into the copper, and it will turn green and stop conducting long before you even realize there is a problem.
Exactly. It is called copper rot. The moisture wicks into the strands and creates a high resistance mess. If you are doing a permanent installation, use oxygen-free copper with a heavy-duty outdoor rated jacket. It is a bit more expensive per foot, but you won't have to dig it up and replace it in 2 years. Also, look for wire that is CL3 rated if you are running it through walls, as that is a fire safety standard.
So, to summarize the practical spec for the average person, if you are looking for a speaker that can survive the elements, IP65 is usually plenty for rain. If you think it might get knocked into a pool, look for IP67. But regardless of the rating, try to mount it somewhere with a little bit of shade and protection from the worst of the wind.
And for the power side, the priority is safety. Use a GFCI outlet, use an in-use weatherproof cover, and if possible, use a system that converts the power to low voltage before it leaves the house. If you are buying a speaker that plugs directly into the wall, make sure it has that UL wet location listing. And do not forget the drip loop.
I think one thing people often forget is that waterproofing is not just about keeping the water out, it is about letting the moisture out. No seal is perfect. Eventually, some humidity will get inside. High-quality outdoor electronics sometimes have a tiny, breathable membrane, like Gore, Tex that allows pressure to equalize and water vapor to escape without letting liquid water in.
That is a very high-end feature, often found in things like outdoor security cameras or professional-grade lighting. It prevents fogging on the inside of the lens. If you are buying an outdoor television, for example, that is a huge factor. Those things are basically giant sealed ovens, and they need that moisture management to survive the humidity.
Outdoor TVs are a whole different beast. The price jump from a regular TV to an outdoor TV is staggering, but when you look at the internal sealing and the brightness required to compete with the sun, it starts to make sense. You can't just take a $500 LED TV and stick it on the patio.
Oh, definitely. You cannot just put a regular TV in a plastic box and expect it to last. The heat buildup alone will kill it in a week. True outdoor TVs are engineered from the ground up to be weather tight and thermally managed. They often have internal heaters for the winter and high-velocity internal fans that circulate air against a heat exchanger to keep the panel cool in the summer. Plus, the screens are usually treated with anti-glare coatings that are much more rugged than what you find in a living room.
You know, it is interesting to see how far this technology has come. 10 years ago, outdoor speakers were mostly these big, ugly rocks that sounded terrible. Now you can get high-fidelity audio that can survive a hurricane. We even have outdoor smart plugs now that integrate with Matter and Thread, allowing you to control your whole yard from your phone.
It is all about materials science. We have better adhesives, better synthetic rubbers like Viton and EPDM, and more precise manufacturing that allows for tighter tolerances on those gaskets. And the testing has become much more standardized. When a reputable company says IP67 now, you can generally trust that it has actually passed those specific tests in a lab. But remember that testing is done with fresh water. If you live near the ocean, salt water is a completely different animal.
Salt water is basically liquid sandpaper and a battery electrolyte rolled into one. If you are near the coast, you need to look for marine-grade electronics. Those usually have even stricter standards, like ASTM B117, which is a salt spray test.
Exactly. That test involves putting the device in a chamber and blasting it with a salt fog for hundreds of hours to see how the finishes and seals hold up. For most people, that is overkill, but for a beach house, it is the only way to ensure your gear lasts more than a single season.
Though, as you said, the lab is not the real world. I always tell people that the best waterproofing is a roof. If you can put your electronics on a covered porch, you are increasing their life expectancy by 5 times, regardless of what the IP rating says. It reduces the UV exposure, the direct impact of rain, and the temperature swings.
That is the most practical advice of all. Use the specs to buy the right gear, but use common sense to install it. Don't tempt fate by putting your expensive amplifier right where the gutter overflows. And always, always check your GFCI once a month. There is a little test button on the outlet for a reason. If it doesn't click off when you press that button, it is not protecting you.
That is a great reminder. Safety first, then the tunes. I think we have covered a lot of ground here. from the first digit of the IP code to the millisecond response of a GFCI, and even the sneaky ways water wicks up a wire. It is a lot to think about, but it really comes down to understanding the environment you are putting the gear into.
And being honest about how you are going to use it. If you are never going to take your speaker swimming, don't pay a massive premium for IP68 if an IP65 model sounds better or fits your budget more effectively. Focus on the quality of the build and the reputation of the manufacturer.
I hope that helps Daniel and everyone else who is looking to spruce up their outdoor space. It is a great time of year to be outside, and having some music or a movie set up makes it even better, as long as you aren't constantly worried about the next cloud on the horizon. It is about creating a space where you can actually relax, not a space that gives you a new list of chores and worries.
Definitely. And if you have any follow-up questions about specific setups or some of the more obscure NEMA ratings, we are always happy to go deeper. There is a whole world of specialized enclosures out there for extreme environments that we didn't even touch on, like explosion-proof housings for industrial sites, which is a whole different level of ceiling.
Maybe we will save the explosion-proof speakers for a future episode when someone asks about throwing a party in a volcano. But for now, I think a rainy backyard is plenty for us to handle.
Probably a wise choice. I don't think my insurance covers volcanic parties.
Before we wrap up, I just want to say that if you are enjoying these deep dives into the specs and the stories behind our everyday tech, we would really appreciate it if you could leave a review on your podcast app, whether it is Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Those ratings really do help other people find the show. We have been seeing a lot of new listeners lately, and it is great to see the community growing.
It makes a huge difference, and we love reading the feedback. We have been doing this for over 700 episodes now, and the community is what keeps us going. Every time someone sends in a prompt like Daniel's, it reminds us why we love exploring these weird little corners of the tech world.
It really is. You can find all our past episodes and a way to get in touch with us at our website, myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there for subscribers, and you can also reach us directly at show@myweirdprompts.com. We try to answer as many listener questions as we can, even if they don't make it into a full episode.
We are available on all the major platforms, so wherever you listen to podcasts, we should be there. And if you have a weird prompt of your own, don't be shy. We love the technical, the obscure, and the just plain strange.
Thanks for joining us today on My Weird Prompts. I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry.
We will see you next time. Stay dry out there and keep an eye on those seals.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.